Hello and welcome to this Year 9 lesson on the Nazi Party in the 1920s. You will need with you your lesson notes template for this lesson. You will find that you have been sent that, or you will find it on class charts or Teams or Pod or wherever else you might be looking for it. And if you fail in your search to find it and you still don't know where it is, you can look in the description at the bottom of this video and you can follow the Google link to a document and you can open it there. Right, let's get started. Okay, let's get started straight away with the first task, which is a recall task. We did 2 lessons ago some work on the early Nazi Party, so Nazi Party in the period from 1919 to 1923. You'll see here a little table. Again, you don't have to use this table. You could use something else. You don't have to print this out and write on it. You could, in fact, do it electronically by typing straight in, or you could just write your notes on a separate bit of paper on a little notepad. What you've got here is a little table which talks about key Nazi Party ideas, what their key ideas were, what their key beliefs were, and then it talks about the Munich Putsch, the causes of that, and the reasons for failure. So, without looking back at the work you did 2 lessons ago, and without having a sneaky peek at the work that is further on in this booklet, try and write down what you can from memory about the Nazi Party, the key ideas and key events in the period 1919 to 23. Okay, so you'll find on page 3 and on page 4 some information to read to try and fill in any blanks that you might have from what you've tried to do from memory. Now, if you've skipped straight ahead to this and you haven't tried to do it from memory, then shame on you. You should pause this now and try and do it from memory before you start having a look at this stuff and before you start having me talk you through what you should have got. If you didn't do that and you've been a good student and you've tried from memory and now you're just filling in the blanks, then well done. So you can see here, the important thing in the early stages of the Nazi Party is that Hitler was vital to the Nazi Party. They were a very small fringe organization. In fact, when they started doing their party membership, they gave people a party membership number, and they gave people a party membership number that was started at 500. So if you were the first member, you were actually member 501, and the second member was 502, and so on, to make it seem like there was more people in the party than there actually was. So you can see that the Hitler was crucial, that they were a small party. We know that they were a very xenophobic, nationalistic, right-wing group. They wanted citizenship to only be for Germans. They were very anti-Semitic. They were against the Treaty of Versailles, and they believed that Germany had been stabbed in the back at the end of the war, and that the Treaty of Versailles was a crime and it needed to be overturned. So we know that that was the main ideas that the Nazis had. We know actually also that being the German Workers' Party, or the National Socialist German Workers' Party, there was a bundle of different grievances because they were both nationalistic and socialist in their views, but actually they weren't from the left of the political spectrum. So the Nazis were trying to appeal to lots of people, and they were trying to appeal largely to working class people who had a lot of grievances, who didn't like the way the war had ended and what the Treaty of Versailles had done to Germany. In terms of Hitler himself, we know that he was a First World War veteran. We know that, again, he felt as though Germany had been stabbed in the back at the end of the war. And we know that he was practicing being an effective speaker, and he was a powerful and charismatic speaker, and that's why the whole Nazi Party revolved around him in this early period. We know also that during the Munich Putsch, the Nazis tried to take over Munich, and we know that they tried this because they were disappointed with the way the government was trying to solve the hyperinflation crisis. However, we know it failed drastically, and we know it was very poorly planned, but that Hitler got a lot of fame and a lot of national attention from his trial and also from writing his book Mein Kampf when he was in prison. And so, in the longer term, the Munich Putsch helped the Nazis a little bit. So, we know that when Hitler was in Landsberg prison for the brief 9 months that he was there, that he spent that time perfecting his message in writing Mein Kampf. He spent that time thinking about the future of the Nazi Party. But when he was in prison and the Nazi Party had been banned as a result of the Munich Putsch, the party almost collapsed. So this shows us the importance of Hitler, the central importance of Hitler to the fortunes of the Nazi Party. What you're now going to look at is a little video clip which talks to you about how the Nazis developed and changed their ideals in the mid-1920s.
During Hitler's time in prison, the Nazi Party almost collapsed without his leadership. When he came out, he decided on a new strategy for the party of votes, not violence. Even though he detested Weimar democracy, he thought the Nazis needed to hold their noses, as he said, and try and campaign for votes alongside other political parties. These years in the mid-1920s were characterized by the Nazis developing something of a political machine, trying to set up headquarters and party establishment in different parts of Germany. In 1926, Hitler faced a challenge to his leadership at the Bamberg Conference. But, having achieved the support of the majority of its members, Hitler emerged from that conference as the undisputed leader of the Nazi Party. In this period of the mid-1920s, the Nazis attempted to set up a political organization, a political machine with different party organizations in different parts of the country. They also changed their political message in order to appeal to different constituencies within the German electorate. The membership of the party grew steadily. However, by 1928, they were polling at 2.6%. The vast majority of the German electorate completely rejected their policies and ideals. They were, to all intents and purposes, despite Hitler being a national political figure, something of an irrelevance. The party was a fringe, extremist group of individuals, something of a joke.
Okay, let's move on to task 2 then. So you've just watched that little clip about the Nazi Party in the mid-1920s. Now you're going to read this information and make some notes on how the Nazi Party changed and developed in the middle of the 1920s. So you can see on page 5 of the notes booklet that you've got some information here, and you've also got some information on page 6 also. And then you've got some space to write some notes about how the Nazi Party changed and developed in the 1920s. Now, again, you don't have to do it on this piece of paper because you could do it on your own little notepad or whatever you're using. Here are some ideas that I think you should focus your notes on. I think you should focus your notes on the role of Hitler himself. So what was Hitler doing to help the party develop? How did the Nazis develop a national party organization? So how did they set up offices and headquarters in different parts of Germany, and how did that help them to coordinate their supporters and help them to grow the party? Focus on the role of the SS and what they did during the mid-1920s. You should also focus on the Bamberg Conference and what this was, yes, but why it was important in terms of Hitler cementing his control over the party. So you want to focus on what Hitler do in this time. How did a national party organization develop? How did they develop headquarters and make themselves a properly functioning political party? What did the SS do? What was their role? What happened at the Bamberg Conference? Why was that important for Hitler's leadership. So, welcome back. What you should have got from that then is how central Hitler was to the Nazi movement. Everything in the development of the Nazis in the mid 1920s revolved around him. So to the extent that when he was in prison, the Nazi Party nearly collapsed entirely. He was the main speaker at events. He was the charismatic figurehead of the Nazis. He was the person that had the national fame, and the movement was built around him. Actually, in many cases, his fame was more important or was ahead of the organization of an actual political party. So he had name recognition, he had fame as a politician, and the Nazis had to spend the rest of the 1920s trying to build an organization around him that could have a chance of winning some votes in elections. And at that Bamberg Conference in 1926, by seeing off any challenge to his power, he cemented his place as the central figure at the heart of the Nazi Party. Okay, so now we're going to move on to task 3, which you can see here is an inference question. Now you'll see in the exam, because this is a screenshot directly from the exam paper, you will see in the exam that you actually get a little set of starter prompts for your answer. So you get what I can infer, one thing, details in the source that tell me this, the other thing I can infer, details in the source that tell me this. So you've got a little structure there to help you. Before we start having a look at this question, however, watch this little video clip which talks you through how to answer an inference question, and uses a different example in order to do that.
The first question on the exam is an inference question. And what's really important about this, and you can see it from the way that the exam board have set up the structure for you to answer the question, is that you need to make an inference from the source. It's most likely going to be a pictorial source. Sometimes it'll be a written source, but often it's going to be a pictorial source. But then you must select the detail from the source that supports the inference that you are making. If you just make an inference but then don't back it up from the source, you're not making a supported inference. And if you describe the source or you impart some sort of knowledge about the topic area without relating that in any way to the source, then you're not making an inference. So with the source that we've got here, some of the example that the exam board gives is the mother was very important to the family in Nazi Germany. So that's your inference. The mother is shown in the very center of the poster feeding the baby. That's the details from the source that you're using to support the inference. The Nazis encouraged married couples to have large families. That's an inference. There are 4 children in this family, which you can see in the source. So it's really important. If you want to think about it as 4 marks, but it's a 1 plus 1. So you infer for 1 mark, and then you support that from the source for the other mark. And if you do that twice, then you get your 4 marks.
Okay, so back to this question. Give 2 things you can infer from source A about Hitler's leadership of the Nazi Party in the 1920s. So think about what you've just seen, about how to do this. Have a go at doing the answer. So pause this and write your answer. Okay, welcome back. Let's have a look to see how you did. Let's have a look at the source. It's from Hitler and I by Otto Strasser, published in 1940. Strasser was a leading member of the Nazi Party in its early years. Here he is remembering a conversation with Hitler in 1925. So remember, for an inference question, we don't really care who wrote it. We don't really care what the provenance of the source is. We just care about the content of the source. It is worth noting, however, that as a source about Hitler, it's probably a pretty good source, as Otto Strasser was a leading member of the Nazi Party, and he knew Hitler. It says, I remember one of my first conversations with him. It was nearly a quarrel. Power, screamed Adolf. We must have power. Before we gain it, I replied firmly, let us decide what we propose to do with it. Our program is too vague. We must construct something which will last. Hitler, who even then could hardly bear contradiction, thumped the table, sharply saying, Power first! Afterwards we can act as events occur. So, what two things can we infer from this source about Hitler's leadership? Well, one thing we can infer is that he liked to be in charge. He was a dominant leader. Details in the source that tell me this, that he could hardly bear contradiction. It was nearly a quarrel when he had a conversation with him. Hitler liked to be in charge, and he did not like people to disagree with him. What else can we infer about Hitler's leadership of the Nazi Party? Well, we can infer that Hitler didn't really have any clear plan. He wasn't particularly a good strategist. It says at the end, Hitler said, power first, and afterwards we can act as events occur. Probably one further thing we can infer about Hitler is that he had quite a sharp temper. He was quite angry, and his leadership style was quite confrontational. He was quite prone to being angry. It says, the first conversation with him was nearly a quarrel. Power, screamed Adolf. We must have power. He's talking about him thumping the table. So Hitler's an angry individual and a confrontational individual, and that says something about his leadership style as well. So we've inferred something and we've supported it with details from the source. And that's all you have to do in an inference question. We're not worried about who wrote the source. We're not worried about using any of our own knowledge. We are simply inferring from the information that we have in the content of that source. So, where are we by the time we get to the end of the 1920s? Where are we with the Nazi Party? Well, Hitler might have built up this political machine, but actually he's not much further forward in getting power. Here is a traditional image of Hitler in the popular imagination.
Denn als unsere Partei gerade 7 Mann hoch war, sprach sie schon 2 Grundsätze aus. Erstens, sie wollte eine wahrhaftige Weltanschauungspartei sein. Und zweitens, sie wollte daher kompromisslos die einzige Macht und alleinige Macht in Deutschland.
So there is Hitler in a speech in the early 1930s, waxing lyrical about how when the Nazi Party started, it always had this one aim, that it was going to be this uncompromising power and it was going to take over, it was going to be the one party in Germany. And he makes it seem like this was all destiny and like the Nazis were always going to take over. However, this is not the case. The last question on task 4 in your booklet says, what was the position of the Nazis in 1928? There's a few things you want to jot down. Firstly, by 1928, Hitler is unquestionably the leader of the Nazi Party. That's fair enough. There's no disputing that at all whatsoever. He's a charismatic leader, he's a powerful speaker, and he was an effective communicator. Second thing, however, is that despite this, the Nazis got very little support amongst the ordinary German population. In the 1928 elections, the Nazis got just over 2.5%. They were polling at 2.6%. So this is really a pretty pitiful showing. After all of this increase in party membership, after all of the development of the Nazi political machine in the 1920s, they are only polling 2.6% in 1928. And that's really important that you jot that down, because it shows that the Nazis were a fringe party. They were a bit of a joke. And that is Something else that you need to jot down. In 1928, the Nazis were not taken seriously. It's very easy to read history backwards and sort of think about all the terrible things that Hitler and the Nazis did in the past, and then look back and try and find as a point where we can say we can trace it all back to this. It was part of Hitler's destiny. He was always going to rise in Germany. Germany was ripe for a right wing takeover of power. But actually, it wasn't. And in 1928, the Nazis were something of a political irrelevance, a little bit of a joke. And so that is really, really important to remember, because in the coming lessons, when we start to look at how the Nazis were able to rise to a position where they were the strongest party in Germany and then rise to a position where they were able to take power, then we need to understand why there was such a sudden transformation in the Nazis' position. And that story of how there was a sudden transformation in the Nazis' position is the story for another lesson. For now, hopefully you've got a good understanding of how the Nazis developed in the 1920s, how they started to build a political machine, started to engage in politics in a different way, started to try and get people to vote for them rather than trying to take power through force. You should have seen the way in which Hitler's position and his charisma and his leadership grew in the 1920s. However, this did not lead to a particularly massive transformation in the Nazis' fortunes, and in 1928 they were still something of a political irrelevance. So, that's what you should have taken away from this lesson. Until next lesson, take care, stay safe, and goodbye.